When I hung up the phone with my father that night, I wasn't crying. I was standing in a coat room that smelled of expensive wool and old flowers, my heels digging into the plush carpet, and I felt clear. For the first time in 8 years, the fog had lifted. It's a strange thing, realizing you've been playing a role in your own life. You tell yourself you're being supportive. You tell yourself you're keeping the peace. You tell yourself that marriage is about compromise. But somewhere along the way, the compromises stop being mutual. You stop being a partner and you become scenery, a fixture in the background of someone else's story. And the scariest part, you don't even notice it's happening. You just keep making yourself smaller, quieter, more convenient, until one night, a man you've never met makes a joke at your expense, and your husband doesn't just let it happen. He laughs along. And in that moment, you realize the chair you've been sitting in for years doesn't have a place at the table at all. That was my life. Or that was the life I had been living. My name is, well, for this story, let's just call me Claire. And this is the story of the night I finally stopped being a seat filler in my own marriage and walked out. It wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering who I was before I was told to be quiet. To understand that night, you have to understand how I got there. It wasn't a sudden thing. It was more like a slow fade. When I met my ex-husband, let's call him Michael, I was a different woman. I was a graphic designer with a small but respected firm in the city. I was the one who friends came to for advice. I was decisive. I had opinions. I had a voice. Michael was a financier. He was charming in that way that people are when they're used to getting what they want. He walked into a coffee shop where I was working on a project, and he asked me what I was drawing. I showed him a logo I was working on for a local bakery. He looked at it, and instead of saying it was nice, he asked me why I chose the font. That was the hook. He actually asked why. We fell in love in that particular, busy way people do in their late 20s. It was all dinners and weekends away, and him telling me I was the smartest woman he'd ever met. Our wedding was beautiful. We had a big tent in his parents' backyard, and I remember feeling like my life was finally taking shape. The first shift was subtle. I was offered a promotion at my firm, a project lead position that would have meant longer hours and a lot more responsibility. I was thrilled. I came home to tell Michael, and he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's great, honey, but we're trying to build a life here. My work is about to get really intense. Don't you think one of us needs to have a schedule that's a little more flexible?" I didn't take the promotion. I told myself it was for the sake of our family, for our future. It was a compromise. Then there were the dinners. Michael's work was all about networking, about being seen. I became his plus one. And at first, I was good at it. I could talk to anyone. I knew a little about a lot of things, but Michael started to get anxious. Before a dinner with his boss, he pulled me aside. "Just let me lead the conversation tonight," he said. "These guys, they just want to talk shop. Don't worry about being interesting, just be pleasant." So I was pleasant. I smiled. I asked the wives about their children. I learned to nod along to conversations about quarterly earnings and acquisition strategies. I became an expert at looking interested without actually participating. And if I ever did try to jump in to share an observation or a story from my own work, I would feel Michael's hand on my knee under the table. A little squeeze. A silent signal that meant not now. Let me handle this. You're talking too much. I didn't see it as a pattern then. I saw it as teamwork. He was the charismatic one, the breadwinner. I was the supportive wife. It was a role, and I was determined to play it perfectly. I planned every detail of our dinner parties. The centerpieces were always elegant. The menus were carefully curated. The seating chart was a strategic puzzle to ensure conversation flowed. I did it because I thought that's what a good wife did. I thought if I made everything around him beautiful and seamless, he would see my value. He would see me. My father tried to warn me. He was a quiet man, a retired engineer. He wasn't rich, but he was steady. He was a man who fixed things with his hands. One Christmas, after watching Michael interrupt me 3 times while I was telling a story about a project I was doing for a local nonprofit, my dad just looked at me. Later, he said, "Claire, a man who can't listen to you in the living room won't defend you in a crowd." I laughed it off. I said Michael was just passionate, just a talker. But his words sat in the back of my mind, a little seed that was waiting for the right conditions to grow. The dinner party where everything changed wasn't even our party. It was a work event for Michael, held at the fanciest hotel in the city. The Aldrich, a place with marble floors so polished you could see the chandeliers reflected in them. The table was set for about 40 people. Crystal glasses, 3 forks, 2 spoons. It was the kind of event where everyone was trying to be seen, but pretending they were. Michael had been on edge for weeks before this. His firm was trying to close a big deal with a man named Sterling. Sterling was older, richer, the kind of man whose grandfather had probably founded a bank. He was the one hosting the dinner. Michael saw it as his moment, his ticket to the next level. I spent all day getting ready. I wore a navy blue dress, simple but elegant. Something I'd bought on sale at a nice store months before, saving up for it bit by bit. I wanted to look the part. I wanted to be the perfect asset. We arrived and Michael was in his element. He was shaking hands, clapping people on the back, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. I stayed by his side, my smile fixed in place. I said hello to the wives, complimented one woman's earrings, asked another about her vacation home. Then the soup course came. It was a pale, creamy bisque. Michael was in the middle of a story, something about a third-quarter acquisition and a complicated spreadsheet. He was talking to a group of men, and one of them was Sterling. Sterling was a thin man with silver hair and cufflinks that looked like they cost more than my first car. He stood slightly apart, not laughing, just observing. As Michael was talking, Sterling leaned around him. He looked at me, and he had that smile that people use when they're about to say something they think is clever. He looked right at me and he asked, "Does she work in the industry?" He was talking to Michael, not to me. He was looking at me like I was a piece of furniture and asking my husband about my function. Michael laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a comfortable one, the laugh of a man who was sure of his place. He put his hand on my knee, that familiar squeeze, and he said, "Oh, no, she's fine where she is. She's got her little projects. It's better this way. Someone has to keep the home fires burning, right?" He looked back at Sterling, expecting a laugh in return. But I wasn't listening to the rest of the conversation, because the table didn't go silent. That was the worst part. No one gasped. No one looked at me with shock or pity. A few people smiled, the tight smiles of people who had seen this 100 times. One woman, a kind-faced woman who I'd talked to earlier about her garden, looked down at her plate. Someone on the other side of the table asked for more wine. And I, Claire, set my napkin down on the table. Slowly. The way you do when you've already decided something and you're not going to be rushed. I didn't say a word, I just stood up. My chair didn't make a sound. I walked out of the dining room, down the hallway with its heavy velvet curtains and into the coat room. I found my wrap, a simple gray shawl my mother had given me, and I put it around my shoulders. My hands were steady. My heart was not racing. I just felt done. I pulled out my phone and called my father. It was late for him, past 9 o'clock, but he answered on the second ring. It was always like that with him. He never answered on the first because he said first rings were for emergencies and panic, and he didn't do either. He never let it go to the third because the third ring meant hesitation. "Where are you?" he asked. No hello. He could hear it in my voice. "The Aldrich Hotel," I said. "East Banquet Hall." "Sit tight," and he hung up. 11 words. That was all it took for him to know exactly what I needed. I stood there in that coat room with my shawl around my shoulders, and I thought about the 8 years I had spent making myself smaller. The promotion I'd turned down. The meetings I'd skipped. The opinions I'd swallowed. The conversations I'd stopped having at dinner parties because of a squeeze on my knee. I hadn't connected those moments. I had just accommodated them. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Where did you go?" People are asking, not "Are you okay?" Not "I'm sorry," just the optics, just the empty chair. I didn't answer. 14 minutes later, a black car pulled up to the east entrance of the hotel. I watched from the window as my father stepped out. He straightened his jacket, unhurried. He was a retired engineer, but he moved with the calm of a man who had never once doubted that the ground beneath him was solid. He was not a rich man by the standards of that room, but he was wealthy in the ways that mattered. He was a man who had built his own house, raised his own daughter, and never in his life had to be anyone other than himself. He didn't hug me when he saw me. He just looked at my face, the same way he'd looked at it when I was a teenager, reading it carefully. "You okay?" he asked. "I will be," I said. He nodded once. That was it. That was enough for him. We got in the car. He didn't ask me to explain. He had raised me to know that I didn't owe an explanation to anyone who hadn't earned the right to hear it. We were 2 blocks away when my phone started ringing. Michael. I let it go to voicemail. Then again. Then a text. "Claire, this is embarrassing. Just come back." I turned the phone face down on the seat between us. My father glanced at it, then out the window. "He doesn't know," my father said quietly. It wasn't a question. We drove to his house, the one I grew up in. It wasn't a mansion. It was a solid, comfortable home on the edge of a lake, about an hour north of the city. The kind of place that didn't need to show off. He made coffee, and I sat at the kitchen island where I had done my homework for 12 years. I tried to find the girl who had sat here before, the one with dreams and opinions and a voice. He set a mug in front of me. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I should have told you sooner." He sat down across from me. "Sterling, the man at that table tonight. He came to me a few months ago. He wanted me to come out of retirement to consult on a project he was working on, a big logistics thing." I said no. I looked at him, confused. He continued. "He didn't know you were my daughter. He asked around after I turned him down, tried to find something to use as leverage. Someone told him about you and Michael. Told him Michael worked at the firm he was trying to do business with." I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. So tonight wasn't random. My father shook his head. "No, I don't think Michael knew the full picture. He was just a tool, but Sterling knew. He put Michael in that room deliberately. He was looking for an angle. He wanted to see if embarrassing you would get to me." I stared at the coffee going cold in front of me. 8 years of a marriage, and the moment that broke it might have been engineered by a man I had met for 5 seconds. I thought about the woman who had looked down at her plate. Had she known? Did she see me as a pawn on a chessboard? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The pieces of the last 8 years rearranged themselves in my mind. The promotion I turned down. The dinners where I was told to be quiet. The feeling of shrinking. It wasn't all Michael's fault. I had given him the power to make me small. But in that room tonight, he had used that power without hesitation. He had looked at the man who was trying to destroy our family, and he had laughed along. By morning, I had 4 missed calls from Michael and 1 voicemail. I finally listened to it. His voice was controlled, the way it got when he was pretending to be the reasonable one. "Claire, I think you overreacted. It was a joke. These are important people, and you walking out like that, it made us both look unstable. Call me back so we can handle this like adults." Handle this like adults, as if I were the one who needed handling. I came downstairs to find my father already on the phone. He was standing at the window, his back to the room. I heard fragments. A name I recognized, Patterson, an old friend of his who was a lawyer. A phrase that landed hard. "Accelerate the timeline." He ended the call when he heard me and turned around. "What timeline?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to tell me. That measured pause. I'd watched him use it 100 times. "I've been reorganizing things for a couple of years," he said, "making sure everything is protected. Part of that involved looking closely at the people connected to us." He looked at me evenly. "Michael's firm has been in trouble for a long time. They've been running on credit from Sterling's holding company for almost 2 years." The kitchen felt very still. "He's not financially independent," I said slowly. "He hasn't been for over a year," my father said, and Sterling was about to pull the plug. I took a shower. I got dressed. I ate a piece of toast, not because I was hungry, but because I knew that what was coming next would require a clear head. My father had built a life by being steady. I was his daughter, and I was done letting other people steer my ship. By 10 in the morning, I was sitting across from Patterson in my father's study. He was a quiet man with careful eyes. He slid a folder across the desk. "You signed a prenuptial agreement," he said. "But there's a clause that Michael's attorney didn't scrutinize carefully. Any documented pattern of public humiliation or reputational harm triggers a review of the agreement under the state's laws regarding fairness." I opened the folder. "Documented how?" Patterson folded his hands. 3 people at last night's dinner have already submitted written accounts. People who witnessed what happened. I thought about the woman with the garden. I wondered if she was one of them. And Sterling, I asked. My father spoke from the corner of the room. Sterling's deal needs to close by the end of the month. Without my involvement or a clean alternative, his whole plan falls apart. He paused. And so does Michael's firm. I closed the folder carefully. I looked at the 2 men in the room, men who were willing to use their power to protect me. And I realized I had my own power too. I had just forgotten how to use it. What do I need to do? I asked. Michael came to the house on a Thursday. I had asked him too. Patterson advised against it, but I needed to see his face. I needed to see if there was anything left in him that I had once loved, or if that man had disappeared so long ago I had just stopped noticing. He arrived looking polished and slightly irritated. That expression he wore when he wanted to be seen as the wronged party, the patient husband dealing with an emotional wife. He sat across from me in the living room and glanced around. "I'm glad you reached out," he said, his voice smooth. "I think we both said things we didn't mean." "You said something," I said quietly. "I didn't say anything." He started to talk. He talked about the pressures of his job. He talked about how I didn't understand what it was like for him. He talked about how important that dinner was. He used the word image 4 times. He used the word love once near the end, almost as an afterthought. I let him talk. I had learned something from my father. You let people fill the silence with themselves. They always tell you more than they intend. When he was finished, I looked at him. "Sterling called you this morning, didn't he?" He went very still. "He told you the deal fell through," I continued. "He told you my father was the one who walked away, and he asked if you could influence me to get my father to change his mind." I watched his face. The mask of the reasonable husband slipped. Underneath it was something else. Panic, calculation, a coldness I had never seen before. "That's why you're here," I said. "Not because you're sorry, not because you think you did anything wrong, because Sterling needs something from my father." He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "The asset review is already filed," I said. "Patterson will be in touch with your attorney next week." For a moment, he just stared at me. The man who had spent 8 years squeezing my knee under the table, telling me to be quiet. He looked like he was seeing me for the first time. "You can see yourself out," I said. "I have somewhere to be." I stood up, walked to the front door, and opened it. The spring air was cool and clean. He walked past me without another word. That was the last time I saw him alone. The process took 5 months. It wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no scenes in courtrooms, just paperwork and patience and the slow, steady work of untangling a life that had been built around someone else's comfort. My father was there, not making decisions for me, but making sure I had the resources to make them myself. I found out later that Sterling's timeline did collapse, just the way my father had said it would. Michael's firm had to let a lot of people go. I heard through Patterson that Sterling had called my father a few times, trying to renegotiate. My father never took his calls. What surprised me most in those months was how many people reached out, other women from those dinners. The woman with the garden sent me a handwritten note. She wrote, "I saw you sitting there all those years. I saw how you made everything beautiful. I saw how he treated you. I was too afraid to say anything then. I'm not anymore." I kept that note in my nightstand for a long time. There was a job offer, not the same one I had turned down years ago. That ship had sailed. But a better one from a company that did design work for nonprofits and small businesses. Someone had mentioned my name to the owner, had spoken about my talent and my eye for detail. I never found out who. I didn't need to. I took the job. I moved to a small city on the coast, about 3 hours from my father. It was Seattle, but it was by the water. I found a small apartment with big windows that faced the bay. I chose it myself. I signed the lease myself. My father drove down with me to help me move. He's not a young man, but he carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs without complaining. When we were done, he stood at the window, looking out at the water. The sun was starting to set, turning the bay a soft pink and gold. "You good?" he asked. The same question he'd asked me in the coat room 5 months before. I thought about that night, the cold marble floor, the smell of expensive perfume and old flowers, the slow way I had set down my napkin, the 11 words on the phone that had changed everything. I thought about the woman who had sat at that table for 8 years, smiling and nodding, making herself smaller and smaller until she almost disappeared. And I thought about the woman standing in this apartment now, with her own job and her own keys and her own life. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. "I'm good." He smiled, the same quiet, steady smile he'd always had. The smile of a man who had watched his daughter fall down 100 times and get back up. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't need to. A few weeks later, I was sitting on my little balcony, watching the boats come in. My phone rang. It was my father. "Did you see the news?" he asked. "No," I said. "What news?" "Sterling's company is being sold. Broken up. It happened this morning." I waited. "I thought you'd want to know," he said. There was a pause. "It's over, all of it." I looked out at the water. The lights on the bay were starting to twinkle. "Thank you," I said, "for that night. For answering the phone." "I'll always answer," he said. And then, because he was him, he said, "Now go do something fun. It's Friday." I hung up and sat there for a long time. I thought about the lesson in all of this. It's a simple one, really. I learned that a seat at the table is not something you earn by being quiet and helpful and small. It's something you take by showing up as yourself, by refusing to apologize for your voice, by walking away when the people who are supposed to love you treat you like a piece of the furniture. I also learned that the people who truly love you don't ask you to shrink. They hand you a coffee, and they ask you what you want to do, and then they wait for the answer. The apartment is quiet now. It's my quiet, my choice. In the morning, I'll go to my job, the one I chose. I'll design logos for a bakery that's just starting out and a nonprofit that helps kids learn to read and a man who wants to open a bookstore by the pier. I'll use my voice. I'll use my hands. I'll make things that are beautiful and true. And if I ever find myself at a table again with a man who thinks I should be seen and not heard, I won't wait for my father to pick up the phone. I'll just set down my napkin and I'll walk out. Because I know now, the only seat that matters is the one you claim for yourself. The sun has almost set now. The last of the light is glinting off the water. It's a new kind of quiet. Not the quiet of being silenced, but the quiet of being at peace. It's the sound of a life that finally, fully belongs to me. And it is enough, more than enough. What would you do in this person's place? I would love to hear your opinion. So please share it with me in the comments. Also, write me where you heard this story from. For more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting for you with heartfelt greetings until next time.